Are you living and leading by design or just by default? It's time to wake up and live the life you want, not the one someone else has programmed for you. Hey, my friends, I'm Tim Windsor. Welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast and to another Uncork conversation. My guest today is life and mindset coach Nancy Boudrie. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim.
It's going to be a lot of fun. A quick introduction to Nancy. I could give you a big bio. You can go on LinkedIn and you can find Nancy for sure. But just a quick intro. Nancy blends her extensive entrepreneurial business knowledge and background with her mindful-based stress reduction training from the University of Chicago and the Mindful Leadership Training Certification that she received from Naropa University to partner with organizations in increasing morale, profitability, reducing workplace injuries and absenteeism, which is all good things, by improving employee mental and emotional mindset. Not just mental health, but mental and emotional mindset. So that's what we're going to be tucking in today. It's going to be exciting. Nancy, additionally, she coaches business professionals to be creative, innovative, and resilient. Those are great qualities. I need some of that, Nancy, so I'm hoping I can get some of that in the conversation today. But all great conversations start off with a good drink for me and a great question. So what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a turmeric ginger tea. It's my nightcap before I go in for my warm winter's nap, as I mentioned. This is the drink of choice in the winter here in Philadelphia.
There you go. Yeah. And we're like, it's March, but it feels like winter. So this won't air for several months, I'm sure, in the rotation, but it's March. So spring's supposed to be here, but it's not quite here. If you're in this part of the country, not quite here yet. I'm going to drink a whiskey because that's what I like to do at night. And so cheers to you, Nancy. Thanks for joining me. All right, here's a question I want to start the conversation with, and I'll give you both questions that I want to ask, and then I'd like to tuck into the first one, and then we'll see where we go. So here's the questions that I'm ruminating on in thinking about our conversation. So my first question is, what is a life led by default? What is that, and why would anybody want to settle for that? Because that doesn't sound too enticing. And then additionally, how do we embrace our opportunity to live by design? This idea of design and default, which is an idea that you play with a lot of. I hear it on social media. I see it in the work that you do. So this is where we're going to tuck in. So what is this life by default, and why would anybody want to do it?
Craziness, right? Well, yeah. I want you to picture the zombies at The Walking Dead.
Okay, I got them in my mind right now. Yeah, that's not good.
This is how people go about life, and they don't even realize it. They're pulled in so many different directions. They're doing so many different things, what people expect them to do, what they think they should do, all this craziness. And they're doing it from a default programming system that was set forth maybe by their parents, maybe by their parents. Maybe it's generational mindset. It's unconscious habitual habits that we form. And we do it from a survival standpoint as opposed to a thriving standpoint. So we're all in this thing trying to, grind it out and survive, and very Neanderthal, which we are.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. So you're suggesting to me, which I'm not sure I like the suggestion, Nancy, just to be clear. You're suggesting to me that I might have been born into some kind of programming, and then potentially through my upbringing and my life experience, I'm going to be 60 soon. So there's been some master programming that's been happening through event or circumstance or people or input. And whether I understand it or not, it's running sort of like this script in the background, like a computer, and it's causing me to respond and react in certain ways. Is that what you're suggesting to me?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why it's so, pinnacle to live a life by design. How do I start living a life by design? How do I get conscious? How do I wake up? Right? And I teach people how to wake up. How do you become aware? You can't do anything about anything unless you're aware of it. So how do I start creating and recognizing that I have these default settings? How do I, embrace that? And by the way, we are negatively wired. That's how we are as a species. They call it negativity bias. So we've already got that, 1 foot over there in the default zone, right? because everything, we'll see everything from a negative lens, because that's how we survived as a species. So you've got all these things, and now you're just trying to get yourself into that awareness. You're a little girl and you're like 3 and you're humming a tune, and your mom has a migraine out the yin yang, and she goes, "Oh my God, stop that noise." Now all of a sudden you just program, I suck at singing. Right? I mean, and that's a silly, but this is how it all starts to form.
Yeah.
Right?
No, listen, and I sure does. And again, if you're listening in, I always say you're listening in for a reason. And what I just heard Nancy say to me, and I think she said it to you by proxy. She's talking to me, but she's talking to you too, I think, is that you might be a bit of a walking dead man or a dead woman. You might be walking around and asleep. As you talk about that, I think of the Robin Williams movie, Awakenings.
Oh, yeah.
And what a powerful movie. And, when you watch that movie and you see these people in this sort of catatonic environment, we look at that and we see them there. And what I hear you saying, that it may be in some areas in my life, I'm a bit catatonic. I'm operating out of an autopilot mentality. I am, I am moving out of a script that I need to somehow rewrite and reframe and figure out a different way of doing that. And that default script is most often not that helpful at the end of the day. And so that being said, so how does somebody, when you start working with somebody, from your experience, I know you come from this deep business background, you had lots of years in this entrepreneurial world, you came from a deep business understanding. I'm interested, first of all, your own personal journey, and then how do you lead somebody like myself? How do you lead me into a different way of framing this? So first of all, how did you find your way to this? Or maybe you were just born into it.
No, I always joke and say, just like half of, all this big population of this wonderful earth, we're all Energizer bunnies running around like we're on steroids. We're all drinking caffeine and we're hyped up and we're doing. And that was me running a 7-figure insurance agency with multiple locations, just hyped, loving life, Energizer bunny on steroids. When I talked to my employees, they could hear me coming down from my office, and it was like, if it was a heavy step, we're scared to death. If it was like a little skip in her step, we were cool. Yeah. Well, but what started happening is all that energy, all that hype, all that Walking Dead type script began to cause physicality in my body. And I was young. I was in my 30s. And every time I'd go to the doctor for this or that or whatever, it was stress related. And all they wanted to do was give me a pill. And I'm not against pills. It's just that, why? Like, physically, my cholesterol is good. I mean, all this, I don't have high blood pressure. You just want to give me a pill to make me chill. Right? And so that's how I even started the mindset stuff. So I went to a yoga class. I started doing all this kind of different stuff and exploring all the things that were available to me. And I found that there was a whole world that I'd never been exposed to of, yoga, mindfulness, Reiki, acupuncture, crazy. So all of a sudden I just started drinking the crazy juice. And having a blast doing it. And really, that's how I got here.
Oh, that's a really powerful journey. So when did you start realizing in your journey that maybe this just wasn't a Nancy thing? It wasn't just for Nancy, that you were going to somehow maybe, I don't know, take this wonderful leap into the abyss potentially. You're going to, at one point you said, I guess I'm leaving my job. I'm going to do something. Something happened. Right. And you take this massive leap of faith and you start moving in this other direction. Where do you start to begin to realize that this is the thing for you?
Yeah. Well, being the entrepreneur that I am, I started doing this in my basement just for myself. I'd set up a little meditation room and all this kind of thing, and just family and friends, and really kind of started showing them this side. And then what started happening is they would share with somebody and they would share with somebody, and even down to my kids' friends and stuff. Boy, you look like you had a facelift. Like that was the first one that really woke me up and shook me
Interesting.
up. They said, you look lighter. Well, I was probably running around like this. Didn't even know it. And so that was kind of a wake up. And then what are you doing? And I didn't know how it would be embraced. I really didn't. And, I started kind of coming out of the closet and telling, hey, yeah, I'm doing this thing called Reiki. I'm doing this thing called mindfulness. And people wanted to know what it was. And then the next thing you know, the businesswoman in me said, man, if I'm going to give this knowledge, why don't I figure out how to make it a business? And what happened was with the insurance, it was all perfect timing because we were making the transition to go totally paperless. This is right when we were quoting things on the computer, but we weren't running applications on the computer. And there was going to be a heavy lift of investment to go to that type of system. And Univest approached us, me, and at the time my husband, with a lucrative offer. So we ended up, that was just all in divine order, I say, all the time. You can't make it up. It's like you follow what is you're guided. And so we sold it. I had just given birth to my second child, gave me a time to take a breath, be a mom, and then I turned this into a business, and then that's all she wrote.
That's an amazing story. So it's interesting. You just introduced another D into the conversation. So we've got this. We live by default, and we have to ask ourselves how we're going to do this. We want to move to living by design, which is by purpose and choice, I suppose, in some very powerful way. But you've just mentioned that for you there was this divine component that sort of somehow energized or was animating this thing that was happening. So is the journey from default to design, is it interconnected for you for sure, but is it interconnected for a lot of people that you connect with, that somehow it intersects with the divine, regardless of how we might articulate that or put our hand on that? Is this an energizing and animating force behind this move from default to design?
Absolutely. Good awareness on that, because when you think of also I incorporated my business, and my business is called Awaken With Light.
Yeah, that's right.
So I absolutely, hands down, believe in something greater than ourselves. I don't care how you define it. I don't care if you call it the energy that keeps planets in alignment. I don't care how you define it. It doesn't have to be a dogma God. But there is this source, or there is this energy. And I believe part of what I teach, and that's why I'm not cut out for everybody, but part of this coming into a life of design, authenticity, we hear that word a lot. How do we tap in and really start to figure out who we authentically are? And how do we get back, what I say when we think of authenticity, it's who you are, regardless of societal things. There's things that are going on, or that are, like I said, expected of you, or all this. How do I get that nugget? And I think a big portion is living eyes wide open. So even when we were talking before the show about, living eyes wide open, being in a growth mindset, not a fixed mindset, expansive ways of seeing things. And that all falls into that, connection to something greater than ourselves.
Wow, that's powerful. So Nancy, I don't tell this story to very many people. Now I'm going to tell it to a lot of people, but I don't tell this story to very many people. But as you talk about what you're talking about, I in an unexpected way, I'm making a connection for myself. So I grew up in a rather dysfunctional family. We'll just call it rather dysfunctional. No, another D. This is going to be like the podcast, like Sesame Street, brought to you by the letter D. Something's going to be happening here. So I came from a rather dysfunctional family, and in my teens, my oldest brother and his wife, who were the first hippies in our community, actually they founded a hippie commune in our community. They were into some serious drugs, astral projection. It was quite the day. It was quite the day. Let me put it that way. And then they had this divine experience where they had this experience. They had a way of articulating it, but it was this experience of the divine, and it radically did change their life. It changed their life. And my sister-in-law was much more like my mother because my oldest brother was 13 years older than I was. So she was very much like a motherly figure, always has been. And I was sitting with her. I was 15 at the time, and they talked about, they had this experience, whatever that was. And they talked about this sort of divine encounter that, in a sense, took them from their default way of living to now they were living by design. They were living differently, maybe by design. And so they talked about this like it was just so powerfully real. And we happened to be playing the game Yahtzee. And so I said to my sister-in-law, I said, tell you what, like, I don't believe this bullshit. Like, I just don't, my life does not in any way line up with there's some divine entity that has any desire to encounter my life, nor if they are, I can't see them very being benevolent. I think they're more malevolent. That's how my worldview was. And so I said, tell you what, I'll give you a chance to prove it. And we were playing Yahtzee. So I said, if you can roll 5 ones, because there's 5 dice, I said, if you can roll 5 ones and three turns at it, we'll add them up. I'll say, I guess there's a divine entity. But if that can't happen, then there is no divine entity. And my sister-in-law, without hesitation, said, no, it's not a problem. And I remember as clear as day that the sound of the dice going in the can and then the shake. She rolled the dice and she rolled 5 ones the first time.
Yep.
Astronomical when you look at the percentage.
Yes.
And that became an encounter in my life with something that I didn't understand. And I will say that it did change and has changed the trajectory of my life and my family's life. So I articulate that or believe something different about that today than I did almost, close to 50 years ago.
Right.
But at the same time, there is something inside of this that I would resonate with.
Yes.
And so I really appreciate this conversation because it's not the normal conversation I typically have in my podcast. But you know what? Again, I'm going to be eyes wide open to the conversation I suppose we're supposed to have today, Nancy, which is finding its way. So this is really powerful. So in a world where you now parlay this into your business and now you're working with CEOs and COOs and all this, how do you begin to encourage them and move them from this sleep, this slumber? How do you move them into a place without, freaking them out? How do you move them into a place where they can wake up and they begin to see of how they can live by design and live by purposefulness to break free and move into the thing that they may have been actually destined for?
First of all, there is a powerful testimonial or recommendation on LinkedIn from a serial entrepreneur. I think he's a chief technical officer, Chris Griffith. And it's not your typical, it's a small novel, but I think he hits it dead on because, again, not sure what he was walking into, just knew he wanted some things to change and then got way more than what he bargained for. So what you're doing is, you're greeting the person right where they are. There is no, let me hit you upside the head and shock the daylights out of you. You're greeting them right where they are. And you are awakening what is there already. So it's a very gradual, you greet them where they are. You're teaching them to really dial in. So very interesting, like dysfunctionality is very we're all broken. Yeah. So we all have some backstory, and typically the more successful you are, the more, there's some dysfunction in there. Mm-hmm. And so we make a joke and it's like, I'm teaching them to really be the observer of some running what we were talking about, typically like perfectionism, or there's things going on and how they're directly influencing what and how they lead. So you can't, this idea of compartmentalization, you're one person in your personal life and is totally a farce because, I've been very candid and blunt with people. I bet you're an a-hole to work for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, their eyes wide open, like because of a few key statements. And it's really, you're teaching them to move into this because they're also coming to you. The teacher arrives when the student's ready, plain and simple. So they're coming there, typically pathway to inner peace, which is why I trademarked that name for my program, my methodology, because most of my people in some form or fashion are trying to find that sense of peace, that sense of balance. And so how do they do that authentically? And it's not cookie cutter. That's why I've never moved it to a group coaching program.
Yeah.
It is, I get in there and I'm accessible, because not only am I teaching them something, but then I want to be accessible. So as you're trying to apply it, hey, Nancy, can you jump on a call for 15 minutes? This is what I got going. And boom, I'm there. Right. So
that's really powerful. So okay. So let's just say that, I came into your orb and I'm this person that's trying to move away from default to design. I'm trying to figure this out.
Yes.
You're first, if I understand it, you're helping me become present and and become an observer, almost sort of get outside myself and become an observer of myself and maybe my behavior, my circumstances, and begin to look at my responses, my auto responses, my auto programming through a different lens. That's where it starts, is what you're telling me?
Exactly.
And then once I start to have this ability to step outside and sort of see myself outside and say, wow, that behavior seems there's something not right here. How do I move here? What are the one or two things that you begin to encourage me to do? What practices potentially can I begin to sort of get my hands on as I wake up and I'm trying to figure this out? What are the one or two practices that I can start sort of exploring that begin to help me in this journey?
Beautiful. Yeah. Mindfulness is maintaining. So the primary tool I use is mindfulness because it is science-based. It's got a lot of data that says you can change the gray matter of the brain, you can rewire the brain, you can change habitual habit. So mindfulness is the vehicle by which I use the most. And there's 4 big influencers, but Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, I was fortunate enough to train with him, and he is the guru of MBSR, mindful-based stress reduction. But mindfulness is that maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, your body sensations, and what's going on around you. And you want to do it with an attitude of openness, curiosity, acceptance, and self-compassion. So I'm teaching them. So each one of those is packed, man. You want to talk about, that's why it's a program and it's a process, because even mindful acceptance is a loaded thing. Mindful acceptance doesn't mean you like it or agree with it, but you have to see it for what it is and then navigate accordingly. And if you're all up close and personal, emotionally attached, and really wanting something to be different than what's appearing, you can't gain mindful acceptance. Thus, you're clouded and you can't make clear decision, right? So you're teaching all these like little things. I tell people all the time, pain is inevitable. That's a challenge in life. Suffering is optional. It's your resistance that creates the suffering. So each one of these things you're unpacking as this person's journeying, and the couple of tools that you start with is teaching them how to dial in. What am I feeling in this particular moment? Most of us don't even really acknowledge our emotions. We don't allow them to be, and we tend to power through them or suppress them because if they don't feel good, I definitely don't want to feel it. I might even numb it. Right. So I teach them that it's not some scary thing. It's just a freaking emotion. Let's talk about it. Right. Yeah. So you're starting to explain, and that emotion, by the way, is creating thoughts that are creating your perceptions in life. And if you think everybody's out to get you, for instance, or shit on you or whatever, like, that's where you got to start changing that emotional current, because it's creating thoughts that are not serving you, that are creating perceptions, and then it's dictating your experience and how you react or respond. So I teach people to dial into their emotions, their thoughts. It's an actual technique, a mindful technique that's a very toe in the water kind of thing. And you begin to just sit in stillness. What am I feeling? Physically in my body. You start with the body. Then you go to, what are the thoughts? I mean, meditating or mindful meditation is not elimination of thought. You're not going to get that. Your brain is designed to think. But I want to be the observer. I want to be like I'm sitting in the movie seats and I'm watching the movie play out. So you're teaching them to place that distance. And that distance gives you the power to pause instead of react. And so you're teaching them to observe their emotion, their physical sensations in the body, their thoughts, and then their emotions, right? I don't lead with the jugular. Emotion is a tough one, but you're just teaching them. And that's called open awareness. And you just begin with that. And then I also teach another thing called stop, which is S stands for stop, take a breath, observe, and then purposely proceed. So you start getting them to apply this pause thing that I'm telling them to do before it's just this knee-jerk reaction and you're on to the next thing.
And that's brilliant, because it was so simple, but I can think of it even as I talk about it. And I heard another D in the midst of that. There's we got a thing going on here, which I really like it. But you got to put distance between things, and between the emotion and the reaction, which is hard to do because it's spontaneous, and because that's that default script. That's living at a default. But it is interesting as you describe that, because I mean, I hate to, I don't know. I don't think I believe what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyways, in case there's somebody's listening who believes this. So my question to you is this easier for men or women to do because of the way we traditionally look at how emotions are processed and stuff? Or is there absolutely no difference in your experience between how men and women get bottled up in this default behavior and have to figure their way through this? Or is there a difference?
That's a good question.
I'm asking it on behalf of my listeners.
I'm not sure if one is easier than the other. One sex is easier than the other. It's how they process that's different.
Yeah, and maybe what's acceptable as emotion.
Yeah.
Because I think as a man, for instance, my belief is if I'm very passionate, or if I'm even a little bit angry, a lot of people will look at that and say, well, that's just, that's masculine, that's strength, that's whatever. Exactly. And I think, unfortunately, because I have a very amazing a daughter who's 34 now. I have a son who's 31, and my daughter, Melissa, she's a force to be reckoned with and always has been. And I'm delighted by her. Let me put it that way. But I can see over time that sometimes I've looked at behavior maybe in my son, and I've looked at a similar behavior in my daughter, and I've judged it a little differently, to be very frank. So I'm the guilty party here on this one. But I do think that there's this thing where I have also realized in my life that the easy emotion for me to admit that I have is that I'm angry. That's an easy one.
I was just going to say, the guys go to the anger.
Yeah, that's easy. Oh, well, I'm angry right now. But I had an experience recently with my partner, who I took on a couple of years ago in my business. I haven't had a partner very much in my career. And we were doing a client meeting, and there was a part in the meeting where she said something. We were on Zoom, and I felt myself getting angry at her. I was frustrated and angry at something she said. I didn't display it in the meeting, but I could feel this emotion rising up. Yeah. And I wasn't happy. And it was a Friday. And I thought, I'm going to wait till Monday because this isn't a good idea. And over the weekend, I began to do what I don't normally do. I stopped, and I tried to step back from what was happening. And I asked myself, and I said, why am I so angry? And then I realized I wasn't angry. I was hurt.
Yes.
I wasn't angry. I was hurt. I was disappointed. I felt diminished by her in this conversation with a customer. And so on Monday, when we got together for our regular meeting, I said, you know what, we're gonna do this thing. So I just said to her, hey, I want you to know this is how I was feeling Friday.
Yep.
This is why. But I realized I wasn't angry. I was actually this. And we had this really interesting conversation. And I recognized that, in a lot of ways, I felt like this little kid again, sort of being diminished and being moved out.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it wasn't a wonderful feeling. Now, it was a hell of a lot easier, Nancy, for me to say, as my earpiece falls out, I'll put it back in. It was a hell of a lot easier for me to say, I'm angry.
Right.
But actually, it was more than that. I was actually hurt, and I needed to process that. And that was more scary than feeling I was angry.
Yes.
Yeah, that was scary.
And that right there, emotional intelligence, that's what, you were very dialed in. You got to that process without even knowing mindfulness or knowing what you were doing. You were doing mindfulness basically, because there are 6 steps to processing difficult emotions to get to that space that you got to. And you got there. And then, like you said, I loved that's a heck of a lot more scary to process, because you saw, we'll go way back to the start of our conversation, the programming that came from that little boy, right? Yeah. Because our emotional intelligence is linked to what they call the inner child, or whatever you want to, all this kind of thing. And you saw it firsthand. It came up, it felt this. And so the go-to was angry, because your go-to is not to cry right there or whatever, it's what's my go-to emotion. And this is what I teach mindful leaders, because you're trying to teach them to not react upon that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's A-okay. So they hit this thing that activated this little boy who was like, oh my God. And, you had enough wherewithal to take a pause. And that's awesome.
Yeah. And I will say that I'm not great at it, and I'm learning. My wife is much better at it than I am.
Yeah.
And she's much better at recognizing when I'm operating by default.
Yes.
And so it's a journey. We're all on this journey, and it's a fascinating subject. And again, if you're listening in for a reason. I really believe that. And so, Nancy, quick question: if people wanted to find you, if they wanted to figure out who is this Nancy and what is this witchcraft, how would they find you, Nancy?
I'm most active on LinkedIn as the social platform. I am on all Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, but my biggest, my playground is LinkedIn. And then I have a website, awakenwithlight.com. And I think and then I have a YouTube channel that has a ton of videos. I've been putting videos up there since 2010 or something craziness. I've got guided meditations. I've got, all kinds of stuff. And so, it's Nancy Boudrie, Awaken with Light, I think, is the YouTube channel. So those are probably the best places to find me.
Okay, awesome. And for those who are listening and you're not in the YouTube channel, that's Boudrie. Yeah. So we got to get that spelling right, because if not, you're going to find a different person. So that's interesting. The one thing I would say, Nancy, that I really just have a lot of respect for when I engaged with you, we met through LinkedIn and engaged a little bit on social media, is the one thing that I found really fascinating is your videos are interesting to me for 2 reasons. So one, because of the content. The content is it's gently provocative. Okay. So there's a gentleness, which sort of it's in your name. So maybe it's just
exactly.
part of that part of
that.
That
isn't a stage name. That's a real name.
That's your real name. Yeah. But part of it is there's this gentle wisdom, but it's actually quite provocative and rather forceful, even though it's gentle, which I find very fascinating. The second thing is, you do these videos in all, how am I going to say this without sounding, in all states and arrays.
Exactly.
Yeah, which for those of you who haven't seen, you got to go find Nancy's. I mean, what I love about it, again, it's just you.
Yep.
And sometimes you look don't be offended, Nancy, but
No,
sometimes you look amazingly put together, by the way. And then other times you look rather disheveled.
exactly.
But what I like about it is there is an authenticity, there
Yes.
is a vulnerability
Yep.
to to this persona and that you bring, which isn't made up. I know it isn't. It's the real you.
Yeah.
But I love it because so many people, when you get into social media spaces, they've
Yes.
gotta, their default is to make sure that they got everything all in the right spot. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. So that they can present and perform.
Right.
But there's something powerful to me about the way that you've approached that. And I think it really is the essence of what you're talking about because
Yes.
again, we have a default about how we want to be seen and perceived by
Correct.
others.
Yes.
We have a default that moved towards perfectionism and wanting to be perfect and wanting to be accepted because we've got everything right. And what I love about that is there's this wonderful genuineness and humanness to all of what you do. And I have a lot of respect for that because I don't do fake very well. I'm not. No, I'm not into fake. So I really appreciate not only the content and what you're bringing, but I equally appreciate the fact that you're bringing it in a way that is just so wonderfully ordinary.
Yeah.
And that to me in and of itself is powerful. And I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for doing
Thank
that
you so
because I
much.
really appreciate it.
That's exactly when I started doing this kind of thing, God, years ago. I of course my thought pattern is, see I do a lot from the woods, but it's a little too cold for me. I'm not a woods person at this time of the year here in PA. And it just started organically happening. Like I'd look at the camera, I just hiked to the top of this thing and I'm like panting and I'm looking, and I'm thinking, no, I'm going with it because I'm feeling it. And then it just spawned to wherever I'm feeling called, like I'm sitting in the middle of my living room, and it's morning, it's, God, I don't even know if I looked in the mirror. I just picked up the camera and we're going to do it right here.
Nancy, I love it, and I think there is something very powerful about it, and that's moving away from again our default mechanisms about how you want to be perceived to living a life by design, which is this whole journey. And again, if you're listening in, you got to ask yourself what this means to you. I know what this conversation means to me. I'm finding some interesting things for myself in the conversation, and I believe as my listeners, you're going to find something interesting. But you're going to need to do some hard work. You're going to have to wake up. You're going to have to get observant. You're going to have to look at yourself in a more honest way, in a compassionate way, though, because Nancy, I think you said that's so important. I wrote a book last year, and one of the things I said in that book near the end is that one of the things we have to do is we have to become our most reliably unshakable friend, along the way in life, and speak to ourselves like we would speak to somebody else. And by the way, that is something that you mentioned in a video that I watched recently of yours, where you talked about how you speak to yourself, and do you speak to yourself like you'd speak to somebody else. I really resonate with that because sometimes I am rather really rude to myself.
Exactly.
And I'm not and I'm not as rude to other people most days.
No, right. So it's such powerful, when we go down this, I tell people all the time, it's not for the non-courageous.
Right.
And you will be conquering your Mount Everest, plain and simple, whatever that looks like. But the beautiful thing about a person like me is I'm holding your hand. I'm there, guiding you. I've got more stories than you can shake a stick at of somebody literally having a breakdown, and they're getting ready to walk on stage and speak to thousands. He's over in, freaking, I don't know what country. And I'm on at the time, I didn't have this program. I was on a retainer. So I'd wake up, I'd be talking to him, all this kind of stuff. But that's why I'm here. It's like, I'm here to guide you, to hold your hand. It sounds much scarier than it actually is. And then what's amazing is it's quite simple, and it becomes a way of being just like breathing. And people go, I can't imagine being that way. I said, you will. because it'll come natural to you as opposed to the reactionary.
Yeah. Yeah. No, listen, we're resetting, and then we get into a new default way of looking at things, which is more positively disposed. It's more living by that design, the design in which we were intended to encounter other humans in the world around us. And so I love the conversation for sure. So listen, as we sort of end up here, I want to bring this back into a bit into the world that I like to live and play in, and that's this world of uncommodification, of understanding that we have by design. I think we have this uniqueness that we were created with, that we came into being with, and every once in a while we give up this uniqueness for the sake of fitting in and falling in line and being acceptable and all that stuff that goes with that. So when Nancy, when you're coming into a room of people, and it could be in a social setting, it could be in a business setting, you choose, but when you walk into a room and you're bringing that thing that Nancy was designed, was destined, was created for, what unique contribution do you know you're bringing into that room as your authentic self?
Ever since I was a young girl, this is so funny. And again, I don't know that I've uttered this, but I remember my mother telling me this, and I've always kept it in my head. She said, I don't know what you have, Nancy, but when you walk into a room, everyone knows you've arrived. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I'm not verbally out loud. There's nothing, I'm quite opposite. I'm an observer when I walk into a room. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason being is that I have, for the most part, tried to live an authentic life. Mm. And I am a very faith-filled person. And now at this juncture, before I step into anything, getting on this call, it is a centering exercise. And I say, God, go before me and work through me. May I be a vessel of love, light, and healing energy. I don't care what I'm doing. This is what I want to be. This is how I want to show up. And before I do the video with the crazy hair, I'm on, I want to be that person. So I'd say that's the thing. It's this natural, radiant light that just oozes. We all have it. Are we dialed into it is the question. And so that's what I'd say is the biggest thing, is that I'm very nurturing, empathic, and I'm like everybody's mother. I love or want or what they, if they didn't have that kind of mother, what they would have liked. Right. I'm very nurturing. So it's just this this very distinct, connection to the divine.
Wow. And by the way, thanks for sharing that. That's really impactful, and I appreciate that. And a couple of things that I take from what you said. It's interesting. On one level, you come in quiet, but there's a veracity to your observation. Yes. which is very fascinating to me. And then there's this part where you somehow, either by presence or by conversation, that you're bringing this nurturing quality into the conversations and into the relationships, which is a very powerful gift that you can give to others. And again, when you're listening in, your contribution doesn't need to be the same as Nancy, because then it would be commodified, of course. But some of you will resonate with Nancy's contribution because you might bring something similar. But my challenge to all of us in this journey is, how are we releasing our uniqueness for the positive benefit of others around us? At the end of the day, if we're doing that, we're probably living by design. We're probably living into and leaning into the sense of calling and destiny towards in our world. And so then we're moving into a place that's going to ultimately create a lot of great things for us and for others. Nancy, brilliant conversation. Really appreciate it. It's really dipped and danced and gone in a lot of different directions than I necessarily expected. Hey, there's 2 more D's, dipped and danced. Look at that. I'm going to be looking for Bert and Ernie soon, because this is pretty
Exactly.
amazing. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. Please, if you want to hunt down Nancy, please do. By the way, I didn't mean that she did witchcraft. That was just a joke. Just to be careful, just for those of you who may be been offended by that, including Nancy, it wasn't witchcraft. It was just a joke. But listen, if you listened in for a reason, do me a favor. Email me at tim@uncommodified.com or DM me on social media. Let me know how you're uncorking this conversation, unpacking it into your life, how you're moving away from default and into design, how you're discovering the default mechanisms of your life when you're breaking those patterns for the sense of something better for you and for others. Thanks for listening. Cheers.